Good morning, everyone. This morning we are in John chapter 18, and it is the middle of the night, early actually morning, before the sun has come up, and Jesus is going to now be arrested. Judas, one of the apostles, was a deceiver and ended up helping them find Jesus so that he could be arrested. He betrayed him for 30 pieces of silver. Let's pick it up in verse 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples to the other side of the Kidron Valley, where there was a garden into which he entered with his disciples. So they had left the upper room a while ago. They had been traveling and walking and very near the temple, by the way, just on the other side of the temple. Now Judas also, who was betraying him, knew the place, for Jesus had often gathered there with his disciples. Judas then, having received the Roman cohort and officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Now, one of the things that you're going to see is that the Pharisees had rule over the Jewish temple. They ran the temple. But remember, the Jews didn't have a country. They lost their country in around 500 BC when Nebuchadnezzar deported them to Babylon. They had come back to their land. The Persian Empire let them rebuild a temple and rebuild walls, but they had lost their country. Now the Roman Empire was in charge. So the Jewish leaders did not have authority to arrest Jesus. They did not have authority to kill Jesus. They had to get the Romans to participate with them in this effort. Now, because they were a predominant religion in the empire, there was some pressure on this man, Pontius Pilate, who was the Roman governor, to work with them. Because if he did not cooperate with the Jewish people and complaints about his leadership reached back to Rome, it wouldn't look good. And he was under some pressure to keep things at peace. So, as you're going to see, he doesn't really want to kill Jesus, but he ends up going along with it and kind of washing his hands of it, saying, well, it's really not of me, but I'm going to allow it, because he's just trying to keep peace in Jerusalem. So that's kind of how this goes down. So they come with weapons. So Jesus, knowing all the things that were coming upon him, went forth and said to them, "Whom do you seek?" They answered him, "Jesus the Nazarene." Remember, it's pitch dark at night. They've got, fire lanterns. He said to them, "I am he." And Judas also, who was betraying him, was standing with them. So when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. That had to be quite a moment. When Jesus declared, I am the I am, they drew back and fell to the ground. Therefore he again asked them, "Whom do you seek?" And they said, "Jesus the Nazarene." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you seek me, let these go their way." He doesn't want the apostles to get arrested, in order that the word which he spoke would be fulfilled, because he didn't want to lose any of them while he was still around. "Of those whom you have given me, I lost not one." Simon Peter then, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear, and the slave's name was Malchus. Peter, as we're going to see, ends up getting a bad rap for denying Jesus, and he just got done saying this very evening, "I'll never deny you. I'll offer my life. I'll never deny you." And indeed, he is about to deny the Christ. But let's not forget that when they came to arrest Jesus, he was the one, even though there's Roman soldiers around, he's the one who pulled off his sword and cut off somebody's ear. So, he had courage. Let's see what happens next. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put the sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it?" And you might recall that in other accounts, gospel accounts, when Jesus was saying his prayer, he said, "Father, take this cup from me, but not my will, your will be done." Meaning, who really wants to go through the torture of the cross? But he ended up going because that was God's will, that he die as our lamb. Hallelujah. So the Roman cohort and the commander of the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him and led him to Annas first, for he was father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. So they're first going to the religious leaders, but the religious leaders, they need to come up with a charge, but they don't have authority to really do anything to Jesus. Now, Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it would be better for one man to die on behalf of the people. Now, you might recall he said that earlier in the book of John, but he thought, well, it'd be better to kill Jesus to bring peace to Jerusalem. Really, what's going to happen is Jesus is going to die to give peace to all of us with God, because he's going to die to forgive us. And Simon Peter, who was following Jesus, and so was another disciple. Now, I want you to see again, because I really feel like Peter gets a bad rap. Can you believe he's following? I mean, he is the one who just whipped out a sword, cut off somebody's ear. The Roman soldiers are there. I mean, he could be and probably should be killed for doing that. And yet, he's following Jesus. He's not running and hiding. He's following Jesus. So, he had courage. Now, that disciple was known to the high priest, that's John, and entered with Jesus into the court of the high priest. So, he got closer access even to what was going on in Jesus' arrest, that is John. But Peter was standing at the door outside. So Peter's just right outside where Jesus is getting questioned. And again, Peter's just right in the midst of these people when he had just done what he had done with his sword. So the other disciple who had known the high priest went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and now brought Peter in. So now Peter's right there. Then the servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, "Are you not also one of this man's disciples?" And, Peter is probably worried about getting recognized as one who, took out a sword. He said, "I am not." So he did deny because, it's a very precarious situation. Now, the slaves and the officers were standing there, having made a charcoal fire, for it was cold, and they were warming themselves, and Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered him, "I have spoken openly to the world. I always have taught in the synagogue and in the temple, where all the Jews come together, and I spoke nothing in secret. Why do you question me? Question those who have heard what I have spoken to them. Behold, they know what I have said." And when he had said this, one of the officers standing nearby gave Jesus a slap, saying, "Is this the way you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken wrongly, bear witness of the wrong. But if rightly, why do you strike me?" Very interesting. So Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. So he's going to go from one priestly leader to another at this point. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. So they said to him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" And he denied it and said, "I am not." One of the slaves of the high priest, being a relative of the one whose ear Peter cut off. Now, this is really dangerous because this is the one that, a relative of the one who Peter attacked. He said, "Did not I see you in the garden with him?" And what if Peter would actually be accused rightly now of cutting off this guy's ear? Peter then denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed. I had an experience one Resurrection Sunday. In the town that I live in, there's a trail. It's an Ice Age trail. And I was going to go for a hike early in the morning. And it was right about when the sun was coming up. And there was a farm where this trail was, and kind of a mini farm. And on this farm, they had roosters. And indeed, as the sun was coming up and I was on this trail, the roosters were crowing. They crow expecting to get fed, but they crow right around the time that the sun comes up. And so as the daylight's coming, and Peter now has denied the Lord 3 times, the rooster crowed. And that sound must have just been devastating to Peter, because just that night before, during the Last Supper, he said, "I would never deny you." And Jesus said, "Before the rooster crows, you'll deny me 3 times. And all of this now is coming on Peter. And listen to what's said in the Gospel according to Luke regarding this scene. But Peter said, verse 60 of chapter 22, Man, I not know who you are talking about. Immediately while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. And Jesus was in proximity to where Peter was. Listen to what it says. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter so he could see where Jesus was being questioned. And he made eye contact, that is Jesus with Peter. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had